Welcome, everyone. So, I'm going to talk a bit about how spiritual awakening can lead to acute physical symptoms, basically, the how and why of it. A lot of people are surprised when they are experiencing a spiritual awakening that they have or develop a variety of physical symptoms. And amongst those are acute physical symptoms. So symptoms that come up suddenly and leave kind of just as suddenly. But for specificity, I will say things like colds, flus, skin conditions that appear suddenly and disappear suddenly, acute digestive distress, things like that. So, one of the things that, from a top-down perspective, that we really need to sort of understand or parse out is that our base conditioning, what we all tend to think and believe and operate under, is this thought of the mind-body disconnection, or we might call it the mind versus the body and spirit. And so there's a lot of different ways that people talk about this, but we could consider it, the mind versus the body, the mind dominating nature, meaning our bodies, and also the natural world. Um, the split between the head and the body, the split between the head, which represents the masculine polarity, and the genitals, which represents the feminine polarity. And we can talk about spirituality that tends to be very focused on the head, and on the masculine polarity, which tends to be about the goal being exiting the body, denying the emotions, um, denying our sort of animalistic nature, or even exiting the body, that being kind of the goal, versus spiritualities that are more body centered or more feminine polarity oriented, which very much talk about needing to feel our feelings, honor our intuition, that the body is the gateway or altar to the soul. That our emotions are gateways to spiritual connection to the divine. I talk about this quite a bit in my work, but I will say that for my purposes or my thoughts, that the opening of the spiritual heart is the end of the spiritual path, in which there is a noticing of love, an experience of divine pulsation, um, an experience of noticing union and how everything is connected, and the collapse of the division between things. So, um, uh, I talk about this quite a bit, but I will share that there are a lot of people out there that focus on emptiness, um, as sort of an end goal of the spiritual path. No identity, no thoughts, no beingness, basically exiting the body and the life, where the work and thoughts that I follow very much have a thought of or understanding of living our human lives more fully and looking at what might be in the way of us living our lives. So, on a simple level, we can look at um, spirituality as either life denying or life embodying. And so I find that that is a very helpful discernment for people who are willing to look at it what spiritualities are causing for me to deny my nature, to deny my feelings, to deny embodiment, deny feelings of love for other human beings, to have feelings of connection, and what might be life hating, life rejecting, life denying, things like that. And when you're able to look at it from such a top-down angle, it can offer you a lot of information. The reason I'm sharing this is because some people do not have physical symptoms on the spiritual path, or there can be a tendency to over spiritualize. We'll talk about the first one first. Is that if your purpose is kind of a life denying spirituality where you're just supposed to get over everything and become essentially an empty husk, um, then you are not going to notice physical symptoms because the purpose is an embodiment. And I know I might sound a little bit harsh about this, but I very much have noticed and noticed for a long time how popularized spirituality very much shows a mirror to our spiritual wounds. And one of the things I see currently going on, and that's been going on for the last 10 to 15 years, but has certainly picked up over the last 10 years, is this idea of disconnection, disdain, contempt for the human body, for human life, for other people, for the world, being this thought of spirituality, when it very much is showing our spiritual wounds. If your end thought of spirituality is, to hate everybody around you and to be disconnected and isolated, all I'm saying is that that might be a bit more about the what is going on a soul level in terms of the sickness of our world than any form of enlightenment. I will also share that in terms of physical symptoms, that Occam's razor very much is a big thought that I have. And basically that means, like Freud said, sometimes a cigar is simply a cigar. Sometimes we get sick because everybody around us is sick, and it has absolutely nothing to do with anything spiritual, or maybe it does on some level, but it isn't worth doing a deep dive or really spending much time on it, other than getting yourself some soup or something, to make yourself feel a bit better. So there is a caution and a lot of discernment needed, because sometimes we do experience physical illness and or emotional illness for that matter, and we may wish to spiritualize it. And in that way, we are actually moving away from clarity and into delusion, or creating sort of thoughts for ourselves that are not entirely helpful. So I will be very clear in saying that every sort of illness and physical happening you have is not necessarily spiritual. And I always kind of make the joke that, if somebody is shot, there may be, very significant karmic reasons for that, but they really should go to the doctor and get the bullet taken out first, sort of thing. Um, and this is the reason I share this is a lot of reasons is because I've seen a lot of people over spiritualize or spiritual bypass, look away from their physical, emotional health stuff by saying it is some spiritual thing. And also sharing it because that physical, psychological, and spiritual care are not at odds with one another. we very much live in a world that is living out this split. And so people come to spirituality seeking to continue that split without recognizing that these aspects of our being are not at odds with one another. And the best way that we can care for and support ourselves is to look at, especially in the cases of more chronic stuff, but even in the cases of some acute illness, the physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual facets of it. That is our best chance for clarity, our best chance for cure or healing on some level. I always think of the Arthur C. Clarke quote that any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. And I think about this as I see this divide play out, and it is incredibly pervasive in our culture, in our world right now, this pitting of uh, magic versus science, so to speak. And without recognizing that they are just simply on a continuum, that the spiritual facets of our nature can be looked at the same time as we may perhaps go to the doctor, and if we can, and go get that rash looked at, or whatever. Um, so let's talk about why people get physical illness, especially acute illnesses, during spiritual awakening. Let's get to the nuts and bolts of it. The first reason I do find is that mind and body split. Is that the body is communicating that, hey, this is not just a mental process or something that is away from the body and the life. It is something within you. And when somebody can process that and start to understand that, they might have, these experiences lessen, or more significantly, they can start to look at what is going on in their bodies in a different way. We have so many lovely resources these days that are showing how things like emotions um, really impact our physical body. Everything from understanding trauma and the nervous system and how we hold experiences there to, kind of the body keeps the score type stuff, where we understand how emotions really deeply impact the body. I will say, as one more aside, that the spiritual understandings of the body, emotional understandings of the body, they are starting to become a bit more mainstream. But there is the thought that the real innovators, or people who are able to see reality on a deeper level, don't tend to be accepted by reality at large. They are simply too ahead of their time. Perhaps another video, but I always think of one of my favorite books for this, which is The Martian Chronicles by Ray Bradbury. It was written in 1950, 1951, somewhere around there. I mean, it was published somewhere around there. And it talks about the colonization of Mars. And if you read that today, you can see how ahead of his time he was, how he was truly speaking about things that the modern mind can perhaps now grapple with, where people, in the 50s after it came out, maybe couldn't so much. So I find it helpful to consider spiritual thoughts kind of at that level, is that they are not mainstream discourse for a reason. They, culture, society, conditioning just hasn't sort of caught up with it yet. But enough asides, let's get into it. The body may be convincing you, hey, this is not just a mental or spiritual or out of body experience. This actually has to do with the physical body and life. The second reason that people tend to get acute physical illnesses during spiritual awakening is because that their bodies are exhausted. Again, with kind of the mind-body split, mind-body-spirit split that we all experience, people don't tend to look at what is going on internally, emotionally, spiritually as labor. And so what happens with some people who are undergoing spiritual awakening is not only do they have their lives, which can be exhausting in and of themselves, but there's also this added, existential labor, so to speak, of continual sort of death and renewal going on within. And that is to work through emotional blockages, to work through and open up energetically, to expand consciousness. All of that requires energy. And what can happen to people is that they get depleted. And in that state of depletion, their immune system isn't what it used to be. And they get sick. They're more susceptible to sickness. Another big reason for acute physical illnesses, colds, flus, digestive distresses, weird skin stuff that happens, is that the spiritual awakening, as I have now said probably 20 times in this video, is not just a spiritual process or a mental process. If you are experiencing an embodied spiritual awakening, so not just having to do with the head, but having to do with the body, what happens is that the physical body, which is the densest of our energies, is going to be impacted. And it is going to need to release what it holds in some way. We only have so many exits out of the body for physical matter, for those physically denser energies that are really affected when we work on ourselves on a deep emotional and spiritual level. Our physical bodies need to change, they need to release. And so what happens is that people will experience things like stuff releasing through their pores, so sweating, itching, some sort of skin condition that comes up. People may experience a cold or a flu because their bodies are exhausted and their body is releasing this physically dense energy out of the body. There also can be acute digestive distress because, again, if the body is trying to release a lot of dense energy because there has been a tremendous amount of healing that has gone on, there's only so many exits. And so it is not uncommon for people, especially undergoing intensive spiritual awakenings, to have a profound shift in consciousness and then discover that they become really nauseous, that they need to urinate a lot, that they need to go to the bathroom a lot, or maybe even that they kind of get sick and vomit. And all of these are really unfortunate things for for a rundown of what I went through during my Kundalini awakening. Everybody loves a good vomiting story, but you can read my book, Working with Kundalini. But the point is, there are only so many exits out of the body for physically dense energies, and one of the ways that the body can really process things is through bringing up, out, and forward those physical dense energies through sickness in order to get them to fully release through the body. Another thing I will mention about this, which gets a little bit more complicated, but it is a helpful conceptualization to have, is the idea of what we call in Chinese medicine latent pathogens. And so in Chinese medicine, this term is often used for things like autoimmune issues that come and go, or, an illness, like, for example, a tick-borne illness in which somebody experiences not only perhaps an acute illness, but symptoms over time due to there being some sort of pathogen or something introduced into the body that sort of lingers there and tends to come and go, tends to come about certain times, and not others, will kind of move in and recede, sort of like the tides of a wave. So that is one understanding of latent pathogen, which is the common one that people talk about. On an energetic level, there's also another consideration for latent pathogen, which is that we may, on some level, get sick, but that sickness does not have the capacity to fully express itself, or our body is sort of battling with it on some level. And what happens is that we get stressed out spiritually or otherwise. And so what happens in that battle is that that latent pathogen then wins. It can come forward, it can come out. And so I will give two examples of this. The first is, let's say somebody has been fighting, feeling a bit of symptoms of cold for a while, but the sort of good energies, so to speak, of the body, the constructive energies of the body, have been able to keep it at bay. And so what happens? The person gets stressed out at work, something emotionally happens, something spiritually happens, and those constructive energies are depleted. And this causes for the cold to be like, yay, I won the battle, and it can fully come up. This happens, can be a considerable factor for people undergoing spiritual awakening, because there does tend to be a great deal of depletion and outer stressors as well as inner stressors that all of us deal with in life, but sometimes the sudden inner stressors that someone undergoing spiritual awakening goes through, the capacity to change, things changing within emotionally, energetically in their landscape, that requires energy. And so the constructive energies of the body may be depleted or may simply sort of be working on other things, and that lets that, sort of cold energy win the battle. And so let's understand latent pathogens through another example. I'll give a personal example. I was taking a craniosacral therapy workshop, and people were working on my head as well as my teeth. And what I experienced was a sudden tasting of rubber and a memory of getting hit in the head with a basketball when I was younger. And I remember this experience because it caused a big goose egg. And what also happened was that somebody in that same workshop was working with my teeth, with my jaw internally, with gloves and all of that sort of stuff. And I tasted metal, and I also tasted the odd sort of bubblegum flavor that a lot of us may be familiar with from dental work. And so I'm introducing this because it is another understanding on a deeper level of how the body releases during spiritual awakening, the possibility of it that people may not be aware of. It is more common in our culture now for people to be aware of that the body can release previously stored trauma through the nervous system shaking, um, or through emotions releasing from stored memories in the body. But we are not yet at the point where we can understand that, most of us can understand that the body also holds on to physical experiences that we have had that impact it. Past illnesses, past physical happenings, um, that sort of thing on an energetic level. And so, yes, we do understand this on a physical level. For example, somebody may get in a car crash, understand that that screwed up their back and neck, and go to physical therapy or acupuncture or whatever, get some massages, whatever their deal is, in order to be able to heal or at least receive some pain relief from pursuing those. It is more difficult for us to understand that on an energetic level, we do hold on to not only layers of emotion, but layers of physical ear illness, um, and that these can encapsulate in our bodies, be held onto our bodies, be held onto by our nervous system, just like our emotions can. And so when somebody's going through a spiritual awakening, they may get sick on some level because, like me, their body didn't fully process the physical and energetic nature of being hit in the head with a basketball, or a previous flu that they had, or something like that. And so, what is happening when the body is undergoing spiritual awakening is that consciousness is flowing through the body and releasing or attempting to break through all of these walls and barriers we've created for ourselves or have been created within us. And many of these barriers are emotional. They're or belief system oriented. We believe the world is like this, we should be like this. Our religion is this, and everybody else can, our politics are this, and everybody else can screw off, sort of thing. Or emotions from our past, or even emotions from ancestors and past lives, and that sort of stuff that can be handed down to us. Um, but we can also have these experiences and expressions of, um, things that have lacked completion on a physical level in our bodies. And these often express quite physically, and they can be confusing to people without the right context. And the question may be, well, Mary, how do I know? And the answer is that having that clarity of discernment isn't going to be possible for, like, 99.7% of the population. And I'm probably being, um, I'm just saying that as a number. Because on some level it doesn't matter. Um, on another level, having context for understanding what is going on can be helpful. For example, I have had people come to sessions with me, um, as a spiritual healer, And what they were reporting after the session is that they are noticing an energetic emotional shift, but they're like, oh, it was really weird. I was on the, uh, I must have had, 15 bowel movements, or my skin got really itchy, or I got a cold after, or I got a sinus infection after. And, looking into these things, you can always pose the question of, hey, did something funky happen here energetically? But again, I'll say 99.7% of the cases, what is happening is that the person has undergone a deep shift, a sort of death in their bodies, and what has happened is that things within them that were previously contained, walled off, physically, emotionally, energetically, are coming up to release and need some manner to release. Um, and that the block in their system that was worked through allowed for latent pathogens to arise and hopefully complete their cycle, for things to emerge and release from the channels of the body that may amount to physical acute illness, but we're stuck in the channels of the body as really dense energy. So I'm open to questions below about this if you have any. But there can be a thought for some people of like, why am I getting physically sick if I'm going through a spiritual awakening? And my response may be anything from, you know, sometimes people get sick, nothing deep and spiritual there, to hey, something was really clearing within you. And of course, your physical body is going to be affected because that is our deepest and densest energy body. And that is actually a good sign, even if it temporarily doesn't feel very good, because your body is releasing stuff that was not energetically, physically, emotionally, spiritually helpful to you. And ideally, on the other side of things, that without that dense energy, without that sickness or that latent pathogen or whatever is going on there, the body will be helped. Or in the cases of the battle between, somebody getting a cold because they got depleted, that can be a good spiritual sign that you needed that rest. And so there can be a bit of grace there. And sickness always offers us an opportunity to offer ourselves grace, to be kinder to ourselves, and to reevaluate um, the war that we tend to have in our bodies. This is, again, one last thing I will mention about the mind-body split, is that we are taught to hate our bodies, to be at war with them, that they are something to conquer. And instead, if we learn to work with our bodies, work with our body consciousness, for example, through my book, The Body Deva, what can happen is anything from coping with pain to coping with illness better to having a whole new outlook on life. So I hope you found this interesting. Thank you for watching.